Hey crazy cats, this is Kalen, I'm a master astrologer, and I am witnessing a video for the first time, and it's called Astrologers versus Astronomers, and this is talking about the middle ground, finding a middle ground between these two groups of people. My first initial reaction is that this is just going to be a long video that basically that's just going to sit these folks down, and they're basically going to say, is astrology real? And the astronomers are just going to say, no, astrology is not real because it's not science. And the astrologers are going to say, my guess is if they're tropical astrologers, they're all going to say, well, it's merely interpretation and blah, 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 blah. And let's just see what happens. Okay, so
I'm Ian. I'm an adventure astronomer and astrophotographer. What I love about astronomy is sharing the passion of the stars with people. I question science all the time. That's the whole point of science.
When I hear of astrologers, I think of people who kind of need guidance. Astrology is not a science. Science is something that requires proof, something that you can reproduce.
I think astrology is just a belief system, and I don't think it makes sense. It's not really a science. I honestly believe that astrology just makes people happy.
Okay, science is also a belief system, and we'll get into that.
Hi, my name is Trenton. I am a spiritual analyst.
There he is.
I definitely believe astrology is a science. We have discovered so much about the metaphysics of things and energies that are hidden.
I think my study benefits people because the greatest gift that you can give someone is self-knowledge. It gives us our own little map of ourselves.
I believe that zodiac signs are totally relevant, but they're just a basis of a much deeper practice. They're the tip of the iceberg.
Step forward if you agree. Astrology is a sham.
Okay, so this already sets us up for a not so great conversation, because if this is astronomers versus astrologers and to see can they see eye to eye, if you're starting off this debate or this conversation or this discussion with is astrology real, and we kind of said that that's probably what this was going to be, you're already starting off the conversation in a wrong way, because you're not leaving the conversation open at any point when you start off the conversation this way, because this is already a leading question that puts the astrologers on the defensive, and it puts the astronomers in this kind of almost superiority seat where they can come up and say, yeah, of course it's a sham.
You can believe whatever you want to believe in as long as, it makes you happy, doesn't hurt others. But personally, I've just never really understood how, especially since we all study stars, how something that's so far away and that could potentially be gone could affect you when you were born. It just doesn't make sense to me scientifically.
And for a person who studies the physical and tangible aspects of giant planets that sit in space, and you don't understand how their movements can affect anything that has to do with us, that already, in my perspective, sounds absolutely insane. So.
One of the things that they don't account for, astrologers, is as time passes by, there's this thing called precession where the Earth's axis actually makes like a rotation. And these constellations were set like 2,000 years ago, and they still assume that these are the ones that are where the sun is when you were born. And also, you can't split them apart equally because each constellation has different sizes. You don't have the sun in one for 30 days. You just don't do that. And look, let's be honest. You can't divide people into these neat categories. There's almost 8 billion people on this planet. You're going to tell me that there's only 13 categories of what we are?
Exactly. It doesn't make sense.
A good point of what she's raised into an argument is that there is something called the precession of the equinoxes. Earth gets off its axis one day every 71 years, 72 years or so. And so because of that, any kind of calendar, any kind of construction of the zodiac that you would to set in place and have it never change, that is scientifically inaccurate. And that is why I personally follow true sidereal astrology. They're only talking about tropical astrologers, Western tropical astrologers. And I know Trent is a tropical astrologer. So sorry, buddy. Tropical astrologers, they do adhere to this strict zodiac wheel that was constructed over 2,500 years ago by the Western Church and totally, okay? They do that. But sidereal and true sidereal, they do not stick to that fixed point of time where the zodiac does not change. And in fact, that is the number one reason why I do sidereal astrology, true sidereal, okay? Because sidereal does take into consideration that the precession of the equinoxes actually happens on our planet. It actually occurs. And so when we are aligning our zodiacs and the constellations and the planets with Earth, we always use that as a reference when it comes to astrology. Now, one thing that she also said, and this is why, again, I follow true sidereal and not sidereal, there's a big difference, is True sidereal uses the correct sizing of the constellations above us. I agree. You cannot separate the sky into 30 degrees, 12 signs each, because that is not how the sky is actually set above us. If you look into the ecliptic, there are 13 signs, not 12, and those 13 signs are all completely different sizes. And true sidereal astrology is the astrology that uses those correct sizes. But yes, tropical astrologers and sidereal astrologers, Vedic astrologers, do use a 30-degree reference for the zodiac. So I will give her that she's brought up a good point in talking about constellation sizes and talking about precession of the equinoxes. But what she doesn't know, and she clearly doesn't understand, is that true sidereal astrology is an astrology out there that does take into consideration the sizings and the precession of the equinoxes.
Jam is kind of it's a negative word, but from a scientific standpoint, we don't see that there's evidence that we can't make predictions on people's lives based on the positions of the stars.
So right there, did you hear it? Based on science, all of them have just kind of sit down and they said, because of science, because of science, because of science. What he had said was that there is essentially no scientific proof that astrology predicts things. And so again, he's making a generalized assumption about astrology, and he's going into one particular section of astrology that is called the divination part of astrology. And there is a slight distinction in terms of talking about astrology as a whole and what it can do for a person and the human psychology, the human behavior, and talking about current planetary alignments and what's going on currently. And then looking forward ahead of time and then making a divination, going into divination to say where the planets are going, and then making a hypothesis about what could occur on Earth with those alignments. And I will go as far to say that the divination is actually stronger with sidereal and even stronger in true sidereal. And in fact, there have been many astrologers in the sidereal and true sidereal branch that have accurately predicted current events that have taken place.
I practice Western tropical
3 minutes
astrology.
into this 22-minute video, and I'm already...
The tropical system of astrology goes off of the equinoxes
tropical.
And the solstice. It has nothing to do with the constellations, what you know of astrology in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. I also specialize in tropical astrology, and that's just one system in astrology, right? There's tropical
two
and
tropical
sidereal,
astrologers.
two systems, and they're separated by 23.4 degrees. It all depends on what system works for you.
So does that mean you have like a choice, or you see what everything means, and you're like, okay, I want to pick that one, I want to study that one?
It's based off of what really resonates, right? And you'll know what resonates with you. You'll get this inner feeling through your chakral system, and you'll know right away.
Whether you resonate with Vedic astrology or Western astrology depends on whether you're more interested on using astrology for predictions or whether you're more interested on using astrology to understand yourself. And
so obviously I'm an astrologer, so you think I would just immediately side with the astrologers in this debate. But so far with this discussion as well, I'm going to go ahead and say I don't like some of the things that these astrologers have said already. The one being that astrology is 100% interpretive and it's based on what resonates with the client. I 100% do not believe that as an astrologer, because as an astrologer, it is not to make this kind of wide claim about, hey, let's sit you down with your chart. You tell me what's going on. I'm going to tell you where that comes out in your chart. That completely negates the whole point of astrology. In the astrology that I utilize, you sit down with the client, you pull up their chart, you talk about exactly what is going on in the chart and the interpretations of those symbols in the chart. I do say interpretation, but those interpretations are based off of observations that have been carried on for millennia, since we're talking like 1st century BCE, okay? We have been making these observations since the dawning of time. And that is basically what science is all about. Science is about it's a method. Science is a method. Science is a belief system. You say, hey, I have this question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a type of study, or I'm going to do a type of research where I'm going to say, hey, guess what? I'm going to see what happens if I do this, and I'm going to repeat that over and over again. I'm just going to observe what happens and then make my best guess, my best conjecture, my best whatever, my best lesson, whatever, based on the results that I get from running this kind of test. Astrologers have been doing this for for probably millions of years, or probably hundreds of thousands of years, ever since humans have been alive on this planet, we have been observing what happens, or what kind of events or energies or personalities end up forming when certain planetary alignments are. Right now, these astrologers are sitting down, and they're bringing up the fact of this kind of sun sign piece, which is only 8.3% of a personality in terms of the Trinity, even less if you consider all of the other planets and all the other signs. Astrology gets complicated and complex really, really quickly. And my biggest problem with what this astrologer has said is that it depends on whether you use astrology for divination or for personality assessment. And that is just 100% not true. You can do divination and personality tests and psychology and all of these kinds of things with any type of astrology. But I will say, tropical seems to be utilized more for entertainment purposes, while sidereal is still holding to the roots of astrology and is actually talking about human psychology, human behavior, social science, and things like that, all within the influence of the planets above. So
you say astrology, meaning that the stars do matter, right? So what part do stars play in Western tropical astrology?
It's not so much being born around the time
that's a
that
good
the
question.
constellation is in a
Let me hear
certain
what
place
she
in the
says, and
sky.
then we'll go
You have
into
this
it.
chart wheel, and it's divided equally in 12 parts. So the rising would be dependent on that wheel, what sign, and not constellation, but what sign, depending on the tropical divisions, is on the eastern horizon. Then the rising is the first house, or it's the cusp of the first house, and there's 12 houses.
What does that mean? Because I hear that, and again, I'm not familiar with it. It just kind of sounds like a lot of
Gibberish.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you think of a clock, the hands pointing to the numbers is not time. They just represent time. So it's the same when you think of the stars. The planets, where they are in the chart, are not the energies that we're looking at. They're just representations of those energies. It's just the realm of possibilities that the way that you express action in your life could show up.
When we categorize different planets in astrology, it's just to give characteristics on the specific energies.
Okay, so the problem that I have with this argument, again, is the fact that this astrologer just said that the signs are not constellations and the constellations are separate from the signs. And this is something that you typically hear tropical astrologers say, that the constellations are not signs. But in fact, that is exactly where we got these signs, and these signs are, in fact, constellations within our ecliptic. Any constellation that is held within the ecliptic, which is this invisible highway that all the planets travel through year after year after year, they are considered a zodiac. And so they do, in fact, those constellations are the signs and the signs are the constellations. I want you to think about the constellations as a city, okay? And as if you're sitting in a car and you're driving through a city, you may not think that the city has a vibe or an energy or a very particular type of personality or traits or whatever. And as you drive through that, you're going to be affected, or you're going to have some kind of experience when you're traveling through all these different cities. And we see that when the planets travel through these constellations, they actually take on slightly different flavor. They kind of vibrate at a particularly different frequency because of where they are pulling at us from which part of the sky that they're in, which is basically what we see is where they are in terms of the constellations, with the planets being in those constellations. So with the astronomer, it's more about where the planets are. I think they're both kind of on the right track there. It's about the planets specifically and which part of our sky they are in, and we're able to map out the parts of the sky that these planets are in, and those different frequencies and those different vibrational poles based on those constellations.
To touch on a point that you brought up, like how can we be here and planets all the way out there, how are they affecting us? Energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? We all heard that in our science classes growing up. So we're all bits and pieces.
That's not necessarily true. This is like essentially you're talking about like kind of conservation of energy and stuff like that, right? But like we live in a universe that, for example, may be infinite.
Yeah.
We don't know. And we never can, because we're limited to a specific distance to how far we can see.
I guess what I was getting to is we're all bits and pieces of energy, so everything that exists in our universe is energy,
I
right?
think that we're getting confused with our definitions of energy. I think that's
Yeah, before she interrupted him, energy cannot be destroyed. That's actually something that is not just some kind of woo-woo esoteric thing to point out from Trent. Yeah, energy cannot be destroyed. And this actually goes to that kind of scientific, and this is actually one of the things that actually kind of debunked that kind of, what was it? Something about nuclear fusion, about how in order to have this nuclear fusion reaction in science, that matter and energy had to actually be destroyed, matter or mass had to be completely destroyed in order to produce a certain amount of energy. There was some kind of destruction involved with the energy that was created, or something like that. How they actually proved that that's actually not true. So it's interesting. So that actually is a science that has actually been disproven. So yes, energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transmuted. And also, let's just talk about what energy is talking about, right? So when we're talking about energy, we're really talking about how something, right, has this capacity to either generate momentum or generate some kind of influence or some kind of sustainment based on something that is potential, kinetic, physical, electric, chemical, nuclear, right? And what do the planets do? The planets vibrate at a frequency that displaces that energy towards us. And we see this through examples of light. We see this through the examples of electricity. We see this through the magnetic poles of these planets. So there is, in fact, something on that maybe Trent is on here slightly when it talks about energy. But let's keep going.
Like we have a different definition of, like, more scientific definition of energy, and you guys have more of a
It's
like a personality, like spiritual, yeah, like that. Like
Yeah, I think there's for science, like
See, we have a scientific definition of energy, and you have a esoteric, feely definition of energy. But she doesn't actually say what her definition of energy actually is.
they have to be very careful about how they use the term energy, because a lot of the times it can get hijacked, or even delving in the realm of like quantum physics, they use the word quantum in a way that it's not supposed to be represented as.
That's fair.
My beliefs are supported by science.
So you guys are probably like, astrology is not a science, but it is, because it's its own separate field. Astrology has been a practice that has been used for civilizations.
What is a science to you? What does science mean to you?
Now, a science is anything that can be applied to the practical realm. I know we were saying a lot of talk about, oh, this is interpretive, or this could be used for predictive measures, but it is something that is practical, right? I have to use math, and I have to use other basic science skills in order to pull up a chart. I'm looking at degree placements, right?
I think that fields could use science and still not be science. You could use math and science and it still not be a science. I think science
what's
comes
your
with
degree? I'm sorry, what's
science.
your definition of science?
I think science comes with fact. There's a scientific method, so you start with a theory and then you prove it at the end. Say we randomly discover a new planet in our solar system,
sure.
okay? Will it change what you guys...
The question is, are your beliefs supported by science? Astronomy is supported by science. Astrology is supported by science, okay? Because let's look at what the actual terms of these words, the etymology of these words. Astro, star, okay? So we have astrology, which is study of the stars, science of the stars, and we have Nami, which is the body of the stars, the body of the knowledge of the stars. Okay? So you have astrology that actually has the word science in the etymology, and you have astronomy, which is actually the knowledge, that even that word could be broken down into so many different ways. You're already getting in a really weird kind of area when you're asking somebody to define, like, the fact that Trenton sat down and said, yes, my thing is supported in science. Science is something that can be applied to the practical. There is a sense of practicality to astrology. And again, that talks about the gravitational forces of the planets. And when he asked her what her definition of science was, and first I will say, she asked him what his definition of science was to try to shut him down for having this belief system, which already is just ridiculous. But the fact that she said her definition of science is that it's fact. And that is actually not what science, that is not the definition of science. The definition of science is not fact. The science is it's a method. It is a belief system. It is a technique. Okay? Science, the basic word of science is essentially running some kind of hypothesis and then making an observation based on the results of that hypothesis. It is a process. It is a method. Science is a way to kind of try to find a way to explain things, okay? And when they try to explain things, they can make some kind of rational statement by doing something over and over again. And that's exactly what astrology does as well. They sit down, they say, okay, when this planet enters this constellation, whatever, when this person has this particular transit in their chart, this is the observation that we make based on that type of conjecture. And then we make a type of rational statement based on those observations, based on that hypothesis, okay? It is not necessarily anything that has to do with making a fact out of something. And in fact, again, we even talk about how Einstein's equation of E equals mc squared, that is a part of the science community, right, of proving that it is a fact. That has been disproven over and over and over again. We also talk about how they talk about the speed of light, how they've done these kinds of tests to test the speed of light over and over and over again, and then made a conjecture and a rational hypothesis or fact saying what the rate of the speed of light actually is. And what do we find? We find that the actual rate of speed of light keeps changing and is actually not constant, and it is actually changing. And so science actually hasn't proven or put this fact on the speed of light because it is something that is constantly changing. So already right there, again, is another hole in this argument of talking about how there's no science in astrology. And it drives me absolutely nuts, okay? Science is a method of trying to come up with some sort of answer, some sort of response, okay? I will say, obviously, I obviously believe in science, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be following true sidereal astrology. I'd be following tropical instead of true sidereal. Like, the definition of science, it's a method. And he said, there is mathematics in science. There is mathematics in astrology. That is 100% true as well. And she said, okay, you can use mathematics and still have it not be science. Okay, give me an example. Let's actually talk about this. He brings up a point and the astronomers shut it down without actually saying anything.
Absolutely, because that would be something that we'd have to sit and try to study. We'd have to conduct research on that planet just as well as you guys would have to do. You guys would just be applying it in a different way. So I definitely look at our field as a science.
Are my beliefs backed by science? No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
Most scientists would say that I'm crazy. Do I believe that astrology is a type of science, a soft science? Yes, because I study psychology, I study therapy. There are people who are saying that therapy and psychology are not sciences. I also think that psychology and therapy are soft sciences. They're not rooted in the scientific method. They are rooted more in the person, in who that person is, and the potential of that human being and their energies.
But there's a difference there, because in psychology, we could scan the brain and see the chemical imbalances. We could see what's missing. We could see the neurons firing. We could see exactly why things are happening, and we could prove that.
So one example, so I will say that is a slightly good kind of interjection from the astronomer. But I will say, talk to me about ADHD. There's all this kind of science or study or whatever behind ADHD, but it's not there actually is no concrete evidence of ADHD. And they've even actually done some brain scans of folks who have ADHD, and only some of them actually show some type of abnormalities or some kind of actual electric activity going on in the frontal lobe or whatever. And in fact, there's actually been a study to show that there's actually a slight difference in the way that children react in classrooms based upon different lights and the frequencies that those lights actually showcase, and how there's actually all these differences about where the sun sits upon the ecliptic, and based on having more light or less light and during the day and things like that, and how that can actually influence a person's hyperactivity or whatever. So gray area.
But you can't always prove the treatment.
But we can also look at a chart. We can also look at a chart and look at how the energies are interacting with a person and correlate it to what is on the chart.
I think energies and neurons.
And I keep using energies, and that's also what I'm trying to say. Somebody had to be like, why is that energy affecting me in this way? Somebody had to sit and study these things. A team had to do research on these things.
I don't have science to prove why
Yes,
I believe
you
what I
do.
believe. It's just, I've been studying this for 7 years and I've been practicing professionally for 4 years.
As Uncle Roger would say,
astrology does not let me wrong. I don't miss.
Is there a way you can tell if you're wrong or right?
Well, yeah,
in
because
astrology?
I speak to my clients. I never tell my clients, like, this definitely happened for you, and if you don't agree, then you're wrong. I'll say, oh, this could be an indication of this. Is this true? And they'll say yes, or if they say no, I'll say, well, maybe it can be interpreted in this different way. That's also where the interpretive thing comes in, is that it doesn't play out the exact same every time.
And so here's another point I think that both of these folks are trying to get to, is that whenever people look at astrology, or anyone who looks at what they classify as pseudoscience or esoteric or woo-woo or spiritual, which I don't consider astrology to be esoteric, is that you have to prove that it exists. And what's fascinating about this is that the proof has actually been there for astrology all along. Or else, why have we been utilizing it for so long? Way back during the Babylonian era, there was no distinction between astronomy and astrology. And in fact, astrology came first, and astrology was actually the thing that birthed astronomy, medicine, agriculture, all these kinds of things, right? It came from astrology first. And this whole thing of the reason why astrology doesn't exist is because you can't prove it. One, he's not being 100% truthful, because what they're actually talking about is, in the science world, it is not considered a science unless somebody showed up with millions of dollars out of their pocket to say, hey, guess what? We want you scientists to do this kind of research, to do these observations, and then we're going to see what happens. And so anytime you're getting to this kind of pseudoscience, esoteric, woo-woo spirituality world, no one has showed up with money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions or billions of dollars, to say, hey, guess what? We want you to run theories and tests to prove that this actually works. No one has actually ever done that. And so that is what these scientists are actually going on about, is that no one has actually showed up with money. And there actually have been a lot of things to discredit scientists in their hypothesis and their results based on who is paying them to get a very particular result. There is a lot of proof that astrology actually works. And you can actually look at a set of transits and say, okay, this is what's gone down in the earth based on these alignments. Those exact things repeat over and over and over and over and over again, and they produce the exact same results. How much more proof can you get? Okay, when someone tells me that when the sun is in the constellation of Taurus, someone is going to lean towards the practical, to not believe in astrology, and they're going to probably pursue some kind of realm that deals with banking, food, musicianship, or some kind of agriculture, farm, mechanic work, right? And then all of a sudden I look at my family and I go, hey, guess what? Look, all of these folks are Tauran sons. Not a single one of them believes in astrology. And guess what? This person in my family is a Taurus. She's a banker. This person in my family is a Taurus. He's a musician and a chef. Here is a Taurus in my family. He's a mechanic, a car mechanic. Here is another Taurus in astrology. He basically crafts and makes things at home and works on building his own herbs, he grows his own weed. Like, he's constantly doing things that are physical labor that deal with agriculture. Like, all of them. Every single one of them. And yet they're going to tell me that that's just a coincidence? Get out of here.
Which is why it can't be pinned down by
And that's
science.
why you can't call it a science.
Yeah.
It's not reproducible. Science is something that is rigorously tested, and it's stuff that's reproducible. You have to be able to reproduce results. What astrology is interpretive. So you might misinterpret things because it's not really reproducible.
So,
like, you're not going to always get somebody
she just
right.
said
And that's
science
not
means that
science.
it's reproducible. And again, astrology, there's been plenty of aspects that are reproducible over and 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 over again.
You know, science is science, right?
I don't know if science is science. Again, see, they're just saying that. I have yet to hear them give any kind of concrete evidence to disprove astrology. They just keep saying science is science is science is science is science. Science means you can prove it. Science means it's a fact. Science, science, science. You're making an interpretation. Interpretations can't be scientific. Science is based on interpretation of the results that you're given. And many scientists have actually taken a sense of study and data, and they make their best observation and interpretation of the data. And sometimes they even throw out data because it doesn't already suit with some of the beliefs and some of the other things that they've already tested for.
That's right. So it doesn't matter if I believe astronomy. It doesn't matter what I believe. It just is or isn't.
Celestial objects influence
And
people's
this guy's
mood.
saying, it doesn't matter if I believe in science or not. Science is there. You can say the exact same argument for astrology. It doesn't matter if you believe in astrology. You know, Beyonce can say that she's a Virgo, whatever. Believe or not believe that she's a Virgo. Because she's not. She's a Leo. She's actually a Leo. Right? It doesn't matter how you look at it, how you try to interpret it. Those characteristics sit in her, whether she believes it or not, whether people believe it or not. Beyonce is a Leo. Prince was a Taurus. J-Lo is a Cancer. Okay? Once you start to actually take a good hard look at people and you actually see their charts, it is unmistakable. You take someone, you sit them down, you look at their true sidereal chart, it is 100% accurate.
Influence people's mood.
I mean, if I'm driving home, maybe I had a bad
Ooh,
day.
an
and I see the moon
astronomer
coming
stepped
up.
forward.
It's so beautiful. Like, how can that not affect your mood, right? It's just so gorgeous. I do a lot of astronomy outreach. You know, I show people the planets or the moon through telescopes. Or total solar eclipse that we've seen, we were all like in tears. It was just so beautiful. So yes, definitely things that happen up there can affect.
It's kind of interesting that he says that astrology is a sham. It doesn't exist. But he just says that what's going on above us still affects our mood. He basically says, yes, they do. Those things above us do affect us emotionally. And if your emotional resonance as a human being doesn't affect your reality and doesn't affect your personality, I don't know what does.
You know how the moons affect bodies of water, right? The closer the moon is, the higher the waves are. The farther away it is, the lower the waves are, right? That's why we have tides.
Yeah, this
kind
is
of,
always...
right? But we're made up of 70% water. The moon in astrology talks about our intuition, our feelings, our emotion. There are so many other planets and celestial bodies that are definitely doing that. So I'm so happy that you said yes, because it is definitely true.
I'd love to know what you think about the correlation between the 28-day cycle of the moon and the female hormonal cycle.
There must be something there. I'm not a
More
evolutionary
times
biologist,
than
so I
not,
don't know.
a woman's cycle does in fact follow the moon cycle almost to a T. And when that cycle, and obviously I don't want to get anyone jump on me for mansplaining this. I've had this conversation with my partner numerous times, and this actually also comes from her as well. If a woman is off of the cycle of the moon, it deals with the hormonal imbalances and how that has been so far influenced or manipulated by the chemical breakdown of the food that we eat, especially here in America, where it's pumped with preservatives and chemicals and all those kinds of things, and how based on our environment and the food that we eat, that actually can influence our hormonal changes internally. And because we're eating things or because we're exposing ourselves to things that are not actually natural, it does put off cycles and things like that. And they do talk about how men have menstrual cycles as well. It's just obviously not the same thing. But it is an interesting point to bring up.
I'll have to say I really liked your interpretation of that.
Of course you did.
You know, the moment that you stepped up, I was like, okay, I know what's coming. I know what it is, because I do agree on that. I mean, look, Mars is really far away. What is Mars going to do, like, you know, to my mood? It just doesn't. Even the gravitational force that we experience between planets that are further away, it's really nothing.
Can I ask what makes you say that with such certainty?
Because I do physics, and so I know how gravity, like the force of gravity works.
Sure, but we have plenty of...
What a cop-out answer, isn't it?
Evidence.
So tell me why you think Mars affects your mood, because it doesn't. Why do you say that? Because I'm a physicist, I know that. if we're going in that direction, so why does Mars affect your mood? Because it does. Well, how do you know that? Because I'm an astrologer and I know that. That argument holds no weight, no merit, no validation in this discussion whatsoever. There is a draw in science with the planets, okay? Think about this in terms of music. There have been, okay, if they want to go this route, there have been scientific evidences that have supported this idea, and I shouldn't even call this an idea, a fact, right? If we're getting into that territory, a fact that music notes vibrate at specific frequencies that touch certain points and align with certain points in our physical body. And when we hear those music notes, it elicits a response from us as organic beings. They have proven that the planets themselves have a very specific frequency and a vibrational sound that is emitted from those gravitational poles, from those frequencies, from those vibrations. That's all science. That when they actually align in a very particular part of the sky, we will experience certain energies based on those sounds that they emit, those frequencies. So when the planets go into a particular alignment in the sky, they play a musical chord. And when we feel that chord, whether we are aware of it or not, whether we can hear it or not, we feel it. That vibrational frequency resonates with us in our physical organic bodies. This is why you get up some days and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel funky today. What is going on with the universe? Or you go, I feel great today. There is based on those alignments. So when you were born as an individual and you're popped out of the womb, you will have experienced all of the vibrational frequencies, all the energies, all of this kind of kinetic potential force of all the things that are going around you in the cosmos, on the planet, whatever, what have you, and it will imprint on you. It will affect you. Now, I will say, astrology doesn't necessarily cause things to happen, but what we do again see is the observation of planetary alignments, how when they form an alignment, a particular alignment, we say these things will probably or more likely will happen based on these alignments, and they do every single time, okay? So when that person comes out, they're feeling all those vibrational frequencies as an individual. That is a snapshot. That is imprinted. That is the screenshot of somebody's natal chart. That is the moment of someone's natal birth chart. And so based on whatever the planets are doing currently, that vibrational frequency either resonates with your natural frequency or it doesn't. And this is something that actually does have its roots in science.
Well, the thing is, if you believe something, right? Mm-hmm. You already believe it. And then the thing that I really have to mention this, like the thing that you mentioned about the correlation between like women's periods and the moon is moving away from us. So eventually it's not going to orbit in the same in the same way. And so what then?
I think there's a big thing right now that we're using between correlation and causation.
I don't understand how that is actually relevant to astrology in the way that it works today. She's making a hypothesis on a what-if scenario. If the moon deals with a woman's frequency, then what's going to happen when the moon is no longer there? Well, guess what? If the moon's no longer there, then we're all in trouble. We're all in trouble!
That's another big divide that we're seeing right now. Like when people are like in a mood or like they're really happy and they go outside, they're like, oh, there's Mars or the moon is full or whatever. That doesn't make sense to me, where people can kind of not blame their behavior, but associate it with what's happening. There's a correlation, but we can't.
And again, we're talking about how there was those studies done about how light affects the personality and the temperament of an individual. And so if you're going out and it's completely dark, you are going to act differently than when you go out and it's fully lit at night based upon the full moon. And there's a reason why we come up with the term lunatic. There's a reason why there are all these mythologies about a werewolf, about how when the full moon comes out, your primal instincts kick in. Your primal instincts come out. You sleep less, right? All these kinds of things. And sure enough, every single time there's a full moon, what I hear from people, oh, I think I'm suddenly developing insomnia because I'm not sleeping. And it happens around 3 nights and then it goes away. And I'm like, oh, guess what? It was a full moon for 3 days. So, is that a coincidence again? There's way too many coincidences, aren't there?
the causation of it.
Right.
So
And I
that's
guess
the
that
problem.
goes back to my my argument that I posed earlier about how energetically things are affecting us. We're affected by this energy, even if
Yes.
it's so many light years away or if it's right here in front of us, right?
Okay. Now, what if I were to tell you that, let's say, Betelgeuse is what is it, like 400 light years away, 600 light years away? If we saw Betelgeuse go supernova, right? Some astrologers might say, oh my gosh, that's affecting us. That happened 600 years ago.
Right.
So why is it affecting me now? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everything that you see, like, if it's something that's 4 light years away, you're seeing it as it was 4 years ago,
Right.
not as it is today.
So, I already know Trent's going to handle this question well, but Betelgeuse has nothing to do with astrology. 1. And 2, time is relative. And I'm not just saying that as like woo-woo or esoteric. Like, actually, we have tried so hard to prove reality through a measurement of time. And every time, even scientifically, when we go down that route, we always get into these sticky situations where we find ourselves left into a wall that we can't cross completely. Time is relative. And so whether or not Betelgeuse actually did blow up 500 years ago, so what? We would see that light eventually anyway. And whether or not we experience something from that, we don't know until that actually happens. Okay? But astrology is not talking about some random stars blowing up billions of light years away.
It can go off of planets that are actually
We're not talking about that.
like in orbit, like the moon, the sun, our basic planets, including Pluto.
Thank you, Trent.
Those are
It's
the
about
only things
the
that I really
planets.
focus on.
So let's just go back to Mars and say Venus, right? Because Mars has all these like really rough and angry qualities or whatever.
You guys are learning.
Yes, and Venus has all these beautiful, calm and peaceful qualities. But what if I were to tell you that if you were to go into Venus and sit there, you wouldn't even make it because the pressure would just destroy you. So how's that peaceful? And what is that like? Where does this come from?
There are no good and bad planets. I just want to there's a highest expression and there's a lowest expression.
Where does this come from? This comes from a millennia of observations about when Venus is in a particular part of the sky and how that frequency influences some of the people and some of the events to occur on this planet. That's how that works. And the fact that Venus is this hot little planet, yeah, Venus is a sexy hot sign. Okay? So what do you think about that? Right? You got Venus in Taurus, which is very voluptuous, and you got Venus in Libra, which is so more idealistic.
Mars is not evil. It can represent aggression. It can represent anger. It can also represent action and motivation. Venus is yet love, relationships, beauty. It can also be manipulation. Like there is no
good or bad to a planet. That is completely
There's levels
human.
here. There's duality. There's highest expression. There's low. I just wanted to, because like me and the planets, like
Right.
they're my people. So like we just got, let's.
This is just an attack on astrologers. This has nothing to do with an open discussion about whether or not both of these hold a certain level of merit in science. And I think that that's interesting. And one of the things that one of the astronomers actually said was, if you believe it, you're going to believe it. And that is 100% true, again, with these astronomers, that they don't believe in astrology. So if they don't believe in astrology, they're never going to believe in astrology. It doesn't matter how many facts you can give them, whatever. They're not going to believe it unless they choose to believe it. And that's the whole point of belief, a belief system. You don't need to rationalize why you believe something. That's why so many people believe in spirituality and religion and things like that, is because they believe it. They choose to believe it. And that's all that people need to know. Do you believe in zodiac signs and their predictions? Yes. And the easiest way to talk about astrology and astronomy is that what they're both doing is they're both tracking the planets. They're both tracking these celestial, physical, energetic objects that are literally flying with us in space. And that is what we are tracking. We're tracking that kind of the physical planets and where they are in relation to Earth. And based on the relation to Earth, what is the effect on our planet? And for these astronomers to study this and to say that there is no correlation, when it is a fact that with the gravitational pulls of the Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, That is why our Earth does not rotate and pirouette perfectly around the cosmos. That is why there is a slight tilt and why it wobbles as it goes around Earth because of those gravitational pulls of these other planets. You remove any of those planets from our solar system, any of those from our galaxy, and there's going to be a big difference in the way that life is here on Earth.
I just was hesitant about coming up with predictions because, it's the word predictions. I'm not of the belief that astrology is necessarily a science because I don't consider myself a scientist. And
that was the whole point.
Astrology is such an
discussion.
interpretive practice that using astrology as a predictive tool sometimes does more harm than good. It can create a lot of anxiety, and sometimes it is inaccurate.
tropical.
You're going to get human error in some sort of interpretations.
I have a lot of friends in this, and they're like, that's so Virgo of you. That doesn't make sense to me. So that's why I don't personally believe in those star signs. I know that you guys discussed that, but that's why I don't disagree with what you guys said. But that's why I disagree with the prompt that was read out.
This is what we hear all the time as astrologers, is that the biggest way to prove that astrology doesn't exist is to go up to someone and say, hey, guess what? Guess my star sign. And if you get it wrong, clearly that means that astrology doesn't exist. Astrology is not a party trick. The first time you meet somebody for the first time, you're not going to see their sun. You're not going to. You're going to see the ascendant sign. You're going to see the personality that they're projecting out for other people to have a first experience with, okay? Because when you meet someone for the first time, a stranger, you're not 100% who you are. You project a personality out to them to assess, to get to know them, and then you go, oh, hey, I like you. Then you start to show your sun sign.
With sun star astrology or sun sign astrology, that's where it can get carried away. It's actually the rising that's most important because that starts your chart.
What the sun represents is our own sense of self. And when you first meet someone at a party, how much are you going to be able to know off the bat from your first impression of them
so
what their
they kinda
sense of
said it
self
there.
is?
Exactly.
What I think is that because we live in a world where we don't know people at all, if you have a way to be able to somehow describe who this person is when you just first meet them, it makes you feel safe. And that's why I feel like, a lot of people take to astrology.
People, they think astrology puts them in a box. Oh, you're a Capricorn, this is the only way you can behave, this is the only way you can act. It's no. Astrology is very much about the possibilities, not necessarily this is what you are, this is what you do, this is how you act, I don't like you. No, it's just this is what could possibly happen. This is the expression you could possibly take.
Would you say that everyone has, all possibilities are available for everybody?
To a certain extent.
Well, to a certain extent. Even if you are, say, a Virgo sun, your Virgo sun could be affected by a certain relationship with, say, Mars. So it's not you're just this and you can only be this. It's no, you've got this, you've got a sprinkle of something of this. It's people don't like be putting in boxes, which
That's a great point, and I'm glad she said that. I'm glad they hit home on this, just the fact of how complicated, again, astrology can get really, really, really quickly. You have a very specific sign for every single planet that is in your chart, and each of those planets has a specific human urge, and the zodiac flavors and colors how that urge is fulfilled, okay? And all of those put together make you who you are. All of those put together. So yes, you have all of the zodiacs within you, but it depends on which area of your life that energy plays out in, which area of your life you find that type of fulfillment in, and that is actually where this big complex situation comes from. So you could say, not all Leos are the same. You're right. Just this slight little thing changes everything.
which makes sense.
Changes
But
everything.
that's totally not what I don't think what we're doing.
It does, though, kind of sound like you're still compartmentalizing
Well,
things.
to the point of there's 7 billion,
Okay.
8 billion people in the world, how can you categorize them in these boxes? But the deeper that you go into astrology, the
Yeah.
more nuanced it gets and the more personalized it gets.
The other side doesn't fully understand the study of celestial objects.
They should all go and sit down.
For astronomy, there's scientific rigor into how
We know
understand
because of
and
science.
how we know what
Get
we
out
know
of
now.
here.
Standing on the shoulders of giants, all the people who have studied it before us, and now we know, and we can prove what they've studied
See,
is correct.
again,
it's very
there's that argument. Science is
factual.
science. And it's
I'm from my
factual.
point of view as an
Facts.
astrologer, things are definitely factual based, and astrologers sat down and they've come to a common consensus of what things mean based off of where they're placed, what energies are
point.
placed on them. That's what gives them more of the component of what the planet may mean.
I think, again, that's where the divide is, because you guys could think certain things are fact, but I hear you keep bringing up that it's interpretation. So there's so many things going on way far away that we know about that, like you said, you don't really have the necessity to know about. I think that there's a lot of stuff that you guys interpret that we've disproven in a way, or that we
What
see
have you
evidence for
disproven?
that's going completely
Tell me.
against it, negating your
What
viewpoints.
have they
So-
disproven about astrology? What have they disproven? these astronomers haven't said a single goddamn thing about anything.
I think that's kind of where the divide kinda comes
What
from.
do you know? What have you proven?
What is the loneliest number?
What?
Yeah, I would never sit here and say that, like you don't know what you're talking about. But also, like, I don't think you can fully
They don't know
understand
what they're talking about
anything.
because none
I
of them
think
know
you can
anything
go to
about
school, I think you can do
astrology.
the work. I think you can have a very good grasp on something, but you can never fully, like, we're talking about the stars and the universe and the planets here. You can't fully understand nothing in regards to that. You read the stars, you read the cosmos, you understand all of the sciencey things. You said Beetlejuice, I was like the character?
All of the sciencey things.
Right now? For me as an astrologer, I study the stars, yes, but I also study people. My job is to work with someone one-to-one. I'm
study
showing
the
you what I
planets, you
see,
study the
but I'm
people,
also
that's-
showing
yeah.
you what I see from you as a person.
Would you say astrology is more along the lines of like human psychology?
Psychology, yes,
There
absolutely.
is psychology in
Depending
astrology,
on the
yes.
system that you are studying.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's
It kinda
that's
means
actually
like that, I guess what astrology is
a
like for
modern
fulfillment.
thing.
In
Psychology
terms of
wasn't
what
used way,
benefits
way back
humankind.
then.
I mean, physics, astronomy literally brings us, cell phones. That's practical. But we also, as human beings, like to have things like art, for example, music.
She
I
just
need
said-
music. If I didn't
wait.
have music, then I might,
She was making an argument for astronomy, saying that physics brings us cell phones and therefore it is good and practical, and that astrology doesn't do that. What?
I think that it's also important to do what you can on a person-to-person basis, and that will help humanity.
Oh, geez. Oh, boy.
Great, thank you so much.
Yes.
That's a wrap.
Anyways, hopefully you'll have a different perspective about astrology and maybe dive into it a little bit more and share this video with people who don't believe in astrology. I absolutely dare you to tell me that astrology is not real and to prove to me that astrology doesn't exist, because you can't. All right. See you later.